cortisol is regulated in let's say harmony, and progesterone and the other hormones are regulated in harmony. They're functioning at the rates that they should be. You don't have one that's dominating the others, right? What does that look like? What's going on inside the human body, and then what does that look like as an expression for women?
Great question. So let me kind of go to the science behind it. When we start our periods as a woman, and that's a little different in menopause, and I'll talk about that, we have estrogen levels that start to rise until around day 12 of our cycle. We have a hormone called LH and FSH, and they go up mid-cycle, and that's when women ovulate. Unless they're on the pill, then they don't have ovulation at all, or some other forms of birth control, which we'll also talk about because they do affect our hormones. And then the second part of the cycle, progesterone levels go up. And that's the thing that I see the most dysregulation when people have too much stress. But in the perfect orchestra, the estrogen goes up, comes down a little bit mid-cycle, progesterone goes up mid-cycle, goes down right before the period. And it's a nice balance. Women might notice a little bit, of mood changes before their period, but nothing serious. They might notice that they have some sugar cravings or a little tired, but not exhausted fatigue. And when I start seeing those things, especially severe PMS, rage, anger, and it goes away, they feel like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They can't believe the difference from one to the other. They get in lots of arguments and they can't believe they argued. And the period comes and it goes away. In perimenopause, what's happening is that the hormones are starting to shift. And we think of hot flashes and night sweats being specifically related to estrogen being too low. It isn't. It's the up and the down of the estrogen that's happening. And if you don't have that balance, what happens then is that we have huge mood swings. We have hot flashes. We have night sweats. And women truly come in saying, I feel crazy. They'll also forget things. They won't be able to remember. They go to a room and it's like, what did I come in here for? Now, cortisol can do that too, but this hormonal dysregulation. Now, the beauty is it balances out. And there's a beautiful thing in menopause also for the person that's going through menopause, changes their diet, works on adrenal stress, which is something we can talk more about. And then things are more stable. Because in menopause, you don't have the mood swings anymore. What you see is what you get. The hormones kind of flat, and FSH levels are very high. Well, how wonderful is that? FSH is the hormone of creativity, of kind of coming into yourself. And that's what menopause is about. The journey of self-discovery. Who am I? What am I going to do for the second half of my life? And how do I get there? So there's a beautiful symphony that goes on that has some up and downs for sure. Now, when you're pregnant, you have very high levels of progesterone and it calms the system down. People kind of mellow and they don't have as much energy as they had before. But it's again another hormone that goes on that's regulated more in menopause. So there's different phases in a woman's life. And when things are balanced, they're amazing. When they're not balanced, they're not so amazing. We have episodes of acne. We have mood swings. We have more fatigue, certainly abdominal weight gain or weight gain around the abdomen in the middle, especially perimenopausally. So there's shifts that are occurring that can be related to the hormones. Now, here's something else important, and that is if your adrenals are producing lots of cortisol, it actually affects thyroid function. So what happens then is it actually puts the brakes on the thyroid. So you have high amounts of what's called reverse T3. So it might look like things are fine because your TSH is great. Your free T4 is wonderful. But then you start looking down the road a little bit more and you find that there's high levels of reverse T3. So people don't have the energy and their thyroid is not working properly and can come from cortisol, which is another important hormone to evaluate.
So one of the things that's happening from what I understand along with that, if cortisol is elevated, so often from stress, from anxiety, from fear, from, all these emotions that we're feeling today in this crazy world that we live in, is that it's suppressing the immune system function, right? And we need the immune system function when we're dealing with any chronic disease like cancer to get rid of the cancer cells. And if it's constantly suppressed by elevated cortisol levels, then and by, the adrenal function being turned up constantly, right? Then our immune systems aren't helping our body to repair and get rid of those cancer cells. And then we see cancers, just growing out of control.
Absolutely. There are many different things that happen with the adrenals. And unfortunately, as a culture, when we talk about stress, what we say is, oh, for God's sakes, just decrease it. My response to that is if people knew how to do that, well, they would have done it 20 years ago. It's not that simple. And unfortunately, our body doesn't know the difference between present day stress and past stress. So if you had a lot of trauma in your childhood, we take that with us until we start to understand that we have an amygdala, primitive brain, primal brain response that we have to really work with ourselves to understand, wait a minute, that was yesterday, that's not today, to help cortisol levels stay stable. So when you have high cortisol or low, because sometimes what you see is it's up and down or all over the place or flat, that causes thyroid dysregulation. It causes hormonal dysregulation. And very importantly, as you pointed out, glucose regulation, fluid retention abnormalities, but really big deal is the immune system. So I see much more autoimmune issues, including Hashimoto's thyroiditis, lichen sclerosis, lichen planus, many things that are associated with the tissues of our mouth and our vagina. But I also see immune issues. And now, years ago, we didn't see that connection. And when I was first teaching for the Institute of Functional Medicine, we didn't have the data. And as an institute, we're very rigorous about looking at the science. We have science to show in double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that people that have enormous amounts of stress and saliva cortisol levels that are abnormal indeed have more cancer and have more in the way of autoimmune disorders. You know, the documentation is there.
So when you're working with your clients or your patients, right, what are some of the key strategies you're helping them with to not only regulate cortisol, but, you know, balance hormones in general? What are some of the lifestyle or hormone balancing strategies that you can share?
So the first thing is I'm going to look to see what their cortisol levels are. I'll do a saliva profile to find out what's their, AM as soon as they get up, an hour later, noon, 4 in the afternoon, and then at night. Because I will treat people differently. I use adaptogenic herbs. If they're high, I might use phosphatidylserine. If they're low, I might use some compound with licorice in it, usually deglycerized so I don't increase blood pressure. Ashwagandha, cordyceps, rhodiola, any of the ones that are my favorites. And then we'll start talking and digging a little deeper, making sure they don't have Lyme or Epstein-Barr or any of the, co-infections. Is there something, bacterially going on, virally going on? But also then we start looking at stress. And people oftentimes will say to me, oh my God, Marcelle, I don't have any stress. Life is really good. And I say, well, tell me a little bit about growing up. What was that like? My mother was an alcoholic, or, my father died when I was very young, or my mother had multiple boyfriends and I didn't know who was coming in and out of the door, or I didn't feel loved, or, my father was absent, or a parent died, or there was fun. All of those things as a child affect our biochemistry. Now you can say, oh my, that was yesterday, don't worry about it. But here's the thing. I wish it was that simple and I wish it worked that way. But I've been in practice 40 years. It does not.
Right.
And so if you don't understand that piece, that's what also precipitates that cortisol from not staying regulated. So I work with them on that. Emotional freedom technique, using the new things that we can adapt to our iPhones, doing breathing techniques, doing yoga. I'm a ballroom dancer. I do a lot of ballroom dancing. So whatever it is to get you out of that fear, that, the worry, the stress, that's what's going to be important as well. Diet, hugely important. Cutting back on processed foods, no artificial colors, sweeteners, dyes, making sure that you eat for not for comfort, but you eat quality food, that you're growing it yourself or you're getting it from an organic farmer, that you're doing, if you're doing protein, finding out what food plan works for you. Some keto works well. Some people is Mediterranean works well. Some people is low fat that works well, but do it within the context of whole foods. And having right relationships, that's huge. Getting outside in nature, putting your feet on the ground, all of those things can transform so much. And learning to have joy and happiness inside your heart is huge. Having a spiritual connection, whatever it is, it doesn't make any difference what it is, but it's what works for you. That's going to be the piece that's important. So you can sit and be quiet and say, you know what? I'm good.